Hello. Um, Good evening, everyone in the room. It's a boisterous crowd, if a small one tonight. No, lovely to have you with us, and welcome to the people who are at home joining us from Zoom, or perhaps not at home, perhaps they're somewhere else, but they're joining us on Zoom. Um, Tonight, it's the second night of the celebration of our Writer's Shift project and all of the many outcomes that have come out from it. Some of you may have been at the performance yesterday that Jill Smith did in the warehouse. To give the context, Jill Smith was the first woman in the Fruitmarket's programme back in 1975, which is, you know, quite a thing, quite a thing. So you set 50 years of other things happening back then. We have been working with writers in residence over the last couple of years while we were closed initially for refurbishment and then laterally, as everybody else in the world was closed for a pandemic. And Jane Goldman, one of the poets working on that project, did an incredible job of researching early women's participation in the Fruitmarket's programme. So not only did she look at Jill Smith, she looked at Tamara Kekorian, she looked at Nancy Spiro, she looked at Ida Biard, lots of other women who in some cases haven't had the attention that their work warrants. And that's definitely the case with Jill Smith. Jill Smith, we were delighted to find out, was still living, making work, quite happily up on the far west of Scotland on the Isle of Lewis, where she was close to some of the sacred sites that have been incredibly important to her work laterally after the part of her career when she was more concerned with exhibition making in a more traditional sense. Jane and Jill entered into a wonderful correspondence, and although we were delayed by the pandemic, we weren't completely forestalled. Well, we were forestalled, but not not completely stopped. What happened was a wonderful collaboration between two creative souls that's led to a very rich part of this couple of days at the gallery with performance work and a new film which we're going to see tonight. So Jane Goldman's very talented daughter Robbie McLean has made a film of Jill Smith's return to the gallery, which we're going to see first this evening. Then we'll hear the poem that Jane wrote and sent to Jill about her work and career. And that picks up on some of the books that Jill has written, not least The Gypsy Switch and Other Ritual Journeys, which we have for sale tonight. So this talks about Jill's biggest work, I'd say, the year that you spent walking around the British Isles, going to different sites for different signs of the zodiac. It's kind of awe-inspiring to think about how you were living and making work during that time, and it's attracted the attention of plenty of other artists who respect you, as do we. So that will happen. We'll have the poem. There'll be a chance to grab a wee glass of wine or a big glass of wine. It's not being sold tonight, so you can choose the size. Then we will listen to Jill present a slideshow of her life's work, which will be the bulk of this evening's event. So buckle up, and I hope you enjoy yourself. And I'm going to just ask Fiona to turn the lights off so we can watch Robbie's short film. This will be a few minutes, and then we'll be into the poem for about 25 minutes. Enjoy yourselves.
So when I was here before, it was the exhibition called The Manifestations of the Obsessions and Fantasies of Bruce LaCEY and Jill Bruce. It's very, very strange because I've got absolutely no memory of this at all. Very weird. I had a concept of what the front of it was like, and it's not anything like my memory. Yeah, it's strange how I've got so little memory of it all. But there's something I can feel in me. I can just sort of feel something, you know, so I am back. I'm back, folks. Wow. Oh, wow. On Thursday morning, I'm going to do like a performance piece, which it'll be in the form of a big spiral that I shall set up before, and I shall walk in and do something in the middle and then walk out. It's to do with my re-emergence. It's like me coming into this space where I have been not acknowledged in the archive, and then emerging as someone who has sort of reclaimed, has put me back into my own life. And so this is me coming out into this new life. So it's really my life after, just before, how I came to be here the first time, and then what followed, and the rest of my life that a lot of people don't know about, and it was all art. The manifestations of the obsessions and fantasies of Bruce LACEY and Jill Bruce
is a solo exhibition by Bruce LACEY.
Exhibition 17th of May to 14th of June 1975.
Exhibitions August 1974 to June 1987. His manifestations are not hers, we gather, she is his. In this show, the summer of 1975, May brings magic into the land, and June is turning bright and strange, and almost in the course of one lunation, a May moon, a flower moon, a milk moon, it manifests, this the fourth of the first ever Fruitmarket shows. She is his substrate, we gather, his maddening subjectile. Throwing, she is nothing but a solidified interval, visible and invisible, before and behind, between, lying down and throwing. She is force before form. The subjectile is a figure of the other towards which we should give up projecting anything. Is she his substrate? She is his subjectile. She is not even his exhibit. Installed on a lower left molar, he speaks through a vast mouth darkly. A painter, a pacifist, a tightrope walking knife thrower, an actor, producer, magician, an explosive maker, a turner of ritual. The manifestations of the obsessions and fantasies of Bruce LACEY and Jill Bruce takes the form of a journey through his life in assemblages, props, and contraptions. The exhibits range, we gather, from his first ever toys, models of Red Indians, to his latest films and sets such as this vast mouth. From journey through the organs of the human body, in which he sits, through which he speaks, to the times. His other films include How to Have a Bath, with Jill Bruce, his wife, and The LACEY Rituals, in which he co-stars with Jill Bruce, Kevin LACEY, Tiffany LACEY, Saffron LACEY, and Fred LACEY. He has married twice, the second time to Jill Bruce, née Jill Smith, with one of his robots as best man. In our society, adults play, he says, with their children very rarely. At bank holidays. But with my family, our work and our play are one and the same thing. Children are what people are meant to be. We believe that what people do for their hobbies is what they should be doing for a living. Living out this theory, LACEY and his young family take his multimedia ex-army tent to festivals, other places where children can be found to play around with climbing, with painting, messing about. Do not mistake these words I spurt here and spread for the show. These words merely a dip and a tilt at its nin, crot and pulley. Is LACEY's the first solo Fruitmarket show?
How is any show a solo? First came 11DA. 11 Dutch artists shone on from New Corn Moon to New Harvest Moon. And a little later, under the waxing crow moon, came a choice selection. The archive lists 2 Scottish artists, one chooser, one chosen. Then Scottish Sculpture 75 by 11 Scottish sculptors arose under a new pink moon. No, you do not need to be told that they are men, that all of the 20 Fruitmarket artists so far are men, or that Bruce LACEY is first fruit soloist.
Jill Bruce, his wife, being not even his exhibit, is so not his collaborator.
Thus, making the 22nd Fruitmarket artist.
No, not Jill Bruce, who is, after all, not even an exhibit, but a name in the list of his works. For example, under 1967 wedding event with Robot.
But Alan Jones, picture midsummer stilettoed waxy legs astride a low hot moon, a strawberry moon. Or is Ian Patterson, perhaps, the 22nd solo fruit? He too, under a hot strawberry moon. The 4 Scottish realists, all buck moon and new antlers that follow, take the tally to 27. But who the Catullus is counting? Up there, the last Apollo eclipses the sun, so Soyuz can snap her corona. And then we come to the 8 from Berlin. A barley moon, a fruit moon, a sturgeon moon. Can you smell the fish? Not.
Not yet. It's between a waning harvest moon and waxing hunter.
Aspect 75. Contemporary Yugoslav art is a comprehensive show of Yugoslav artists. The archive lists 4, but there were 49, including performance work by Marina Abramovic, a terrifying experiment on her own body called Hot Cold. She held her hand on a sheet of glass under a block of ice with an electric fire suspended above it for half an hour. Then she uttered a cry and smashed the glass, cutting her hand. But she remained in position without moving while the skin on her hand began to burn, until the audience called for the fire to be switched off. Yes, Marina Abramovic is all the archive sees now. See the Fruitmarket archive, see the Richard DeMarco archive. No, you do not need to be told Marina Abramovic in 2021. But do you need to be told Ida Beard? Yes, Ida Beard. Between waning harvest and waxing hunter, what did Ida Beard bring to Fruitmarket? What did Ida Beard perform? How did Ida Beard assist? Ida Beard is the founder of La Galerie des Locataires in a rented apartment in Paris in 1972, the Gallery of Tenants. She declares,
"The artist is anyone whom others give the opportunity to be an artist."
Asks artists everywhere to mail her works for exhibition in her apartment or for realization according to instruction in other places, until 1976 when she went on strike. The protest of a curator against the conduct of artists. She is against the conduct of the so-called dissenters, of the so-called avant-garde within the current system of the art market. But the Fruitmarket show came before her strike. The Fruitmarket show was between waning harvest and waxing hunter. The Fruitmarket declaring with Ida Beard what Ida Beard declares to artists everywhere.
The artist is anyone whom others give the opportunity to be an artist.
Gallery as postal service. Mark Boyle's Journey to the Surface of the Earth saw in the winter solstice of 75. It was 10 more years before his collaborative work with Joan Hills and their children, Sebastian and Georgia, was shown under the collective name of the Boyle family.
Meanwhile, Jill Bruce has become Jill Smith, leaves the LACEY family for a ritual journey around a sacred landscape.
No, you do not need an Airtable grid view to tell you it took 5 years. 5 years and 51 fruit shows until Eye to Eye, video installations, a solo show by Tamara Krikorian featuring Vanitas, or an illusion of reality. Vanitas, or an illusion of reality, is the third in her Vanitas series. Vanitas, or an illusion of reality, consists of 2 channels, still life and self-portrait. There are 2 versions of self-portrait. Version 1 was made in 1978 in black and white. Version 2 was made in 1979 in colour. Was it version 2 in the Fruitmarket? The debut work, Tableau, places a live broadcasting TV. Another TV turned towards a large wall mirror reflecting the image of the artist in a 1-hour take. Both installations make use not only of video and mirrors, but actual still life objects, flowers and fruit wilting and rotting, the artist fading again and again in the broadcast space as they wilt and rot. Krikorian is placing TV among the bubbles and other tropes of transience in historical Vanitas painting. Both installations were in a specially constructed space within the gallery, and in the outer space was a separate section of documentation, die-line prints with quotations from the notebook for the project, photographs of cartoons about television, an interview and documentation about previous work. I have watched, courtesy of Lux, the Vanitas video of 1977. The artist is before the mirror, reflecting a still life with fruits, a candle, a flicker, an opened wine bottle, a TV. Richard Baker is reading news of the historic ceremony marking Spain's transition from dictatorship to democracy, cut in on by the fading artist mise en abîme, recounting her encounter with a painting in Oxford, probably by Nicolas Tournier, an allegory of justice and vanity which has haunted her ever since, hence her own Vanitas, hence this Vanitas, or an illusion of reality. Installing fruit in the Fruitmarket, flowers and fruit wilt and rot, the artist fades on a loop, autumn 1979, the hunter's moon waxes, then wanes. Now the beaver moon rises.
Do not hold your breath. 52, autumn 1979.
Tamara Krikorian, Eye to Eye video installations.
65, summer 1981.
Elizabeth Blackadder, a retrospective.
102, winter 1985.
Mary Kelly, interim.
112, spring 1987.
Gwen Hardy, paintings and drawings.
114, summer 1987.
Kate Whitford, enormous drawing on Kelton Hill.
115, summer 1987.
Nancy Spiro, works 1954 to 1986. A simultaneity of women through time is how Nancy Spiro describes her running figures. Caryatids on the lamb, a scrolling Artemis is sprinting alongside a modern athlete. A prehistoric shadow figure is dancing behind them. A goddess she is.
A powerful, self-sustaining and autonomous being, capable of moving through life as freely as a man, lightly, between bedroll and baby, a bag in each hand. She is between, above and below, visible and invisible, before and behind, this side and that. Is how I see her moving. She has taken to walking, thrown and throwing. She has thrown off an environment, has thrown off herself as an environment of the others. I am spurting and I am spreading these words. I
have been reading and mixing these words. They have
something of the subjectile, the substrate, something.
Not speaking of and not speaking for. Something I am not.
Wanting to make a figure of the other. I am wanting.
To be throwing by the subjectile, the substrate. To
surrender, lying down and throwing. I want to surrender. She never cared for this maze, a chronological pathway, her least favourite show in a labyrinth form, less memorable than the broken bonnet hitting the windscreen of the hired car. Ginger to his Fred in The Electric Element, she wrote the catalogue, unacknowledged. Backstage, she was hearing her ideas voiced out front with no credit. She performed a robot striptease down to the bones. She was proud to be taken at Alternative Miss World for a gay man. She performed the rainbow at the Albion Rainbow Fair. She performed the moon at the Albion Moon Fair. Written out of the retrospective like a possession now lost, all the costumes and the props she designed and made on display unacknowledged, most of her images without credit. She prefers sunlight, moonlight, oil lamp and candles, the moon moving her body in watery, dark depths.
In the green throat of the land.
Little rustles of small animals.
A little heather hollow.
A nest in the sun.
Yellow irises and no trees.
Eagles nesting on the nose.
Of the sleeping beauty. Her brow.
On her brow. Where all the journeys meet. Sisters in fire and
water sisters.
He had stolen her language. Herself was torn from herself. She has slept on her knees, shins to the ground, deep in the chambers of Neolithic long barrows, old mother chambered cairn, old mother long barrow, all her fragmenting atoms hanging on, exhausted by vision. Eyes open.
Felt shut.
Eyes shut.
Felt open.
She has distilled her wild writings into a few clear, pure lines. At the common, embracing the base, she sang the song of the mountain, becoming boundless at the fence. To her, the mountains is the sleeping beauty. She has seen the old hag dying, becoming maiden, walked in spirals on a dreaming path, followed the map in shape of the divine hag, slept among the rattling leaves of yellow irises, paused by the well of the dead, walked on hot streets, slept in the ditch of the world. She knows.
We cannot fill mountains with death.
She knows.
When Bowie comes on the jukebox, it is time to leave.
She knows
the soft shape of the place, the furriness of the grass. Moss is growing on the pillars of wall.
she finds a quiet place by the fence. A green helicopter hovers over the washing nappies. Peace walking to Greenham, pregnant, she becomes Spider-Woman. Soon, on the other side of the world, she is curried in at the side of Uluru with the baby and a saucepan of quandang. She has seen the crone beneath the maze, querying the need for words, shifting realities under the U, crossing Tower Bridge by horse and wagon, she finds
two realities crashing head-on.
She senses,
Patriarchy and the stones of Stonehenge.
she knows,
To leave the green ant in the earth,
she loves.
the peat reek.
She has moved with the turn of the planets across the unbounded land. She has strung a crystal on a red thread winding out from the common into winds that blow wet with serpents all around her head. She knows the when and she knows the where of how to wait.
For the low June moon to stand still on the mountain.
She has seen the earth give birth to the moon.
A woman alone by choice.
A willful wanderer.
Oh God, thank you. Bravo.
Shall I take that away from you now?
Okay.
So that's us at the juncture. Congratulations, Jane, on a fantastic poem, and that's giving you the overview of some of Jill's experience. After about, let's see, where are we at? Let's see, 7 minutes break. we'll start again at 25 to, and Jill will do her slideshow. If you'd like to get some free refreshments, we've got some wine and water over there. Okay, so that's us just going to start again with the second part of this evening. So just to say, in case I didn't say it clearly enough, the poem that Jane and Jill were just reading is in the book, the Writer's Shift book, which we've got here, and I think my colleague Louise is putting it in the chat for those of you at home if anyone wants to buy it online, as well as the Gypsy Switch and Other Ritual Journeys, which is the meatiest book of Jill's in terms of her life and career. But I won't hold you up any longer because we've got plenty of beautiful images and slides to look through, and the clock is ticking. So I'm going to hand you over to this evening's main event, Jill Smith.
Yeah, so this is based on the book, although it goes more up to date. I think one important thing I want to say is that I'm very kind of interested, or have been for a very long time, in ancient cultures. And the fact that we don't really know anything about what ancient people did. But I think that one thing we can be sure of is that they didn't divide life up into different sort of sections. You didn't have art, religion, science, everyday life. It was all part of one thing. Their art was part of their religion, and their religion was part of their daily life. And so that's a very important point for me. So I better just get going. Where? Oh, right, okay. Now, this is my mum and me. Now what has happened here is me being sort of forgotten and left out of the archive. And my mum and my dad both died when I was 2. And because I wasn't told anything about her and people didn't talk about her, she became forgotten. So, like, Jane's poem put me back. And just by showing you a picture of my mum, I'm putting her back too, because I think she deserves it. Right. So it's not clicking very well. Yeah, right, it's a bit slow. So although I was good at art, I did go to art school. I was obsessed by the theatre, so I went to drama school. And I met Bruce LaCEY around about this time. And although I did a few small parts in television shows, I soon began working with him and his mates, the Alberts, doing their sort of comedy shows. But the trouble was, it sets me on the end. I wasn't doing anything creative or anything new. I was just sort of doing parts that any woman could have done. So although it was fun to be out and working, it wasn't being very creative. So I don't know what. Right. Now, when I was at RADA, I mean, everybody in those days changed their names to something exotic. And I wanted to still be Jill Smith. And when I got one line on a television programme, I went to Equity, the Actors Union, and said, right, can I be a member now? Can I be Jill Smith? And they said, oh, there's somebody with a name very similar. So I had to, on the spur of the moment, think what to be. So I said, Jill Bruce. So I was Jill Bruce for the next 20 years or so. This is just one of the shows that I did with Bruce and the Alberts. That's me up there. I think that was a poster on the Underground for something. I can't remember what. So a bit later, we did our own, with Bruce and the Alberts, we did our own version of the Three Musketeers. It was called The Three Musketeers Ride Again. And in this, we wrote the script ourselves, and so I was able to write my own part. And I started making my own costumes. So I was being a little bit creative. So you see, this is the robot that later became it wasn't really a robot, but it was a machine. It was operated by radio or electric controls. So this was the Queen of France. We had done it originally with an actress, but she sort of fell out with Bruce, and Bruce replaced her with a robot. And the King of France was the playing card, and there's Bruce down there. So I don't know why is it not right. Round about, there's several different threads of life all happening at the same time. And around about this time, we're talking about early 70s. Those other things were happening in the 60s. We formed a community art group with our children. We then had 3 children and Bruce's eldest son, John. And this is one of the things we toured around. There was a lot of money available for community events in London, in London boroughs, and there were regional arts associations that we went and did lots of things with. So this was called the Incredible What's It Machine. Children just played in it. But we did something called the Magic Fun Factory, and then we did something called Journey Through a Black Hole to a Coloured Planet. And this, again, I was becoming a bit more creative because it was a giant black inflatable, and you went inside, and I recorded a sort of message that took you through on this journey. And inside there were inflatables, and I made costumes that they were painted in fluorescent paint, and the cushions were painted in fluorescent paint, and there was ultraviolet light. And I made costumes for my daughters and me. So again, I was much more now getting to be part of the creative process. And then with the Alberts, we did a science fantasy show called The Electric Element. And I mean, again, I designed this poster, but I never ever thought to credit myself with the things that I was making. The Electric Element was all the cast wrote their own scene, and at the beginning, I think this one is Bruce, sort of, who was a scientist, a professor.
Are you pressing it really hard?
Sorry?
Are you pressing hard?
Yeah. He created this thing called a materializer, and he called in the most beautiful woman in the universe. It was me. In the original show, in the original show, I came through naked, but we used this again in a later show. And then she disappeared, and he travelled through time and space searching for this woman. And she appeared in every scene. It was like there was pirates, Russian scene, doppelganger. And in every scene, a woman who looked like her appeared, but she didn't recognise him. And so we went on to the next thing. And then right at the end, she appeared in front of a great golden sun fan, and she did recognise him. And we did this. This is our Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers dance, and well, that was the end of that. So it was a lot of things happened to me in that. I mean, I designed a lot of the costumes and painted the sets. I painted a fluorescent, some Basils, isn't it, in Moscow, and I did like animated scenes. You know, it was like one of the animated things appeared on a DVD, and I don't think I got the credit. I never had the thought that I should be credited for things I did. It was all part of everything. So after the Electric Element, Bruce and I wanted to do more science fantasy shows, and the Alberts didn't. So we decided that we would become a performance duo, and we created this show called Stella Superstar and Her Amazing Galactic Adventures. And the audience was sit in the centre of a room, and there were all different scenes all the way around. It was multimedia. It was film sequences and slide sequences and live action sequences and music, and we toured this around the country for a year, and that we had to sort of prove ourselves to the Arts Council of Great Britain, as it was then. And then after that, we proved we could do what we said we were going to do, and we then got a performers. Well, it was a guarantee against loss, so we got funded for the next 5 years. So sorry, going back to that one. Yeah, so it was like I was creating these fantasy costumes for myself, and I'd always had problems in my hair, and so I got all these. They shot window dummy wigs. I went to this firm that made shot window dummy wigs. They were really hard, but it was lovely. So I had all these. I became these different people that I wanted to be. So it was around about this time that we then were asked. Well, Bruce was asked to do a sort of a story of his life show at the Whitechapel Gallery in London, and it was like a journey through his life, but at the point where I had come into his life, there was a whole lot about me, and then the things that we'd begun to do together. And they asked us to bring it here, and we called it that. And which is it's so bizarre now, you know, that was in the title, and in the archive it was just his solo show. So this photograph was taken as publicity for the Whitechapel show. So again, it was both of us, and we were out photographed together in a cemetery opposite. And that's the mouth that Jane refers to. When he was interviewed by the Times, there was just a photograph of him in it. And another thread of my life at this time was that for the first 5 Andrew Logan's Alternative Miss Worlds, I appeared. Yeah. So they were, you know, both men and women appearing in them. And in the early ones, so this was one thing that I did kind of on my own. It was kind of mine, and not just something I did with Bruce. and I sort of did the costumes to begin with. I just made costumes out of things that were around the house, and then I was wearing these. So then I made these costumes. Right, that's swimwear, and that's I'm not sure if that's probably evening wear. I think, yeah. I think in the previous one, I think that was swimwear, and that was day wear. Yeah. One year, the year that Derek Jarman won, I came fourth. You know, yeah. Right. And we were roadieing our own shows then, so I was incredibly strong and fit. And I did actually tear the old London telephone directories in half. I could do that, you see. And, and this is the year when I got chatted up by this bloke who didn't know, this gay bloke who didn't know whether I was a man or a woman, and I didn't tell him. So then we began doing small pieces of just sort of one-off performance pieces. Sometimes later we put them together into one show, but we just go into different situations and do. This is the British landing on the moon. Bruce did devise it with somebody else, but then we carried on doing it. We came on. We had one spotlight and dry ice and that beautiful music. Is it Zarathustra? You know, that sort of in 2001, and it's wonderful. You know, you began to think, God, I might actually be on the moon. You know, and we did all these very English things. You know, so at the same time we did lots of things. We had one that was like a British picnic. We'd go into a shopping mall and we'd sit down, and it was called Tin Picnic, and everything in it was in tins. So we opened a tin, and there was a tin opener in the tin. I don't remember how we opened the first tin. And then we opened one and pulled out a radio, and quite by chance it was playing the Archers one day. And then this was a piece. I loved Woolworths. And so I wrote a piece about Woolworths. It was actually a poem that was recorded, and we just sort of did this. Woolworths was changing. You know, when I was young, it had these wooden floors that sort of smelt of oil, and you had these all things you could buy like one biscuit almost, and you know, it was wonderful, and it was all beginning to change. And so this was my homage to Woolworths. So again, and you see, I'm making all costumes now. I'm creating my own works as well as the things that I did with him. So this is the robot striptease. I won't show you all the different bits. So I started out as a robot, and this was one of the costumes. It was all sorts of different sequences it went through. And then there was an ultraviolet sequence. I was gradually taking more and more bits off. And then eventually I went behind a screen and I sort of held out my skin, which was a bit of rubber, and then I held out the skeleton, so I'd strip right down to the skeleton. And we did this once, because Bruce used to do these art school lectures where he was talking and showing films, and then we started to do them as with all these performance pieces. And that was when I was standing out the back once, and because he did all the talking, and I realised that he was talking a lot of my ideas and things that I'd come up with and things I'd said, and not crediting me for them. Right, and so yeah, when we did this one, we did it at some art school, and somebody went back and told their mum, and their mum got onto the media, and it was all this business like, lecturer's wife does striptease, you know. I actually got one person phone me up and said, you should put bombs under people like you. Anyway. And then another thing that I did at this time, where it was still in the 70s, was have these events. Now, picnics were becoming a big thing for me. And I think eventually I began to think, well, I should develop picnic as an art form. So I had my birthdays at the Wayland Smithy, Longbarrow in Wiltshire. Is it Wiltshire or Hull? No, I can't remember. It kept moving Oxfordshire. So I sent out these invitations, and people would come. And I do like we were by now, at this point, this is one of the, I did it for several years. By this time we were doing our sort of ritual performances, and I did like a harvest festival, sort of a harvest performance there. And then all the people sat down and had a picnic. And I'd have everything that was to do with Smith, you know, Smith's crisps and Granny Smith apples and John Smith's beer, I think. In the later ones, we then had, I'd send out afterwards, I'd send these out to people who hadn't been able to come and just telling them, you know, what happened and what we ate. I think this year we'd moved to Norfolk by then, and I was just using all the produce of our land. So, so continuing with the picnic theme, then when my daughter Saffron was 10 years old, we had her saffron picnic at the Saffron Walden Maze in Essex. And so we invited people to come, and so all the food was yellow and all the drink was yellow, and we asked people to come wearing yellow clothes, and some of them went to great sort of lengths to make lovely clothes. And then I divided, the labyrinth on the Saffron Walden Maze has got 4 corners, so I divided everybody up into the element of their birth sign. And so they each walked in a line and they picked up objects from the corner and they took them into the centre where Saffron was standing, and they gave her the gift and a daffodil. And then we had the picnic. So then we were doing certain things outside, and they were all a bit comedic, you know, at this point. And this one, we were getting a bit alchemical. And we did this thing of sort of drawing, we were going to draw something down from the heavens, and this nose cone appeared, and we opened it, and there was this Martian. He made a cake, and so I then cut it up and gave it to all the people around. And then after doing all this, we did several of these sort of multimedia science fantasy shows. And then somebody asked us if we'd like to go to the last Barsham Fair in Suffolk. And it was then that we began doing these rituals, sort of celebrating the elements and the turning cycles of the year. And this was our first one. We called ourselves the Elemental Coordinators. And it was another lot of, so really making different sort of costumes now. And this one, it was that year of the drought, you know, and we did rainmaking ceremonies, and it flooded out the fair. So then we began this whole several years of going to all these fairs in East Anglia. And so we were always working in a circle, and it was like I worked the performances out, and Bruce built all the structures. And we were celebrating, I say, the elements, and the performances themselves were a kind of journey. It was a sort of sequence events. It was a kind of journey. Now this one is Earth, and I'd actually we built it was like a long barrow with stones in the front. And before it started, I was lying there. I was covered in turf, and it really was like being under the ground. It was beautiful. And this is another Earth fertility performance. We did a lot of these fertility performances. It's an Earth one, so these are my Earth costumes. This is the air one. One of all the themes in all the fairs in East Anglia had themes. So there were air fairs and fire fairs, rainbow fairs, tree fairs. So all our performances were related to the theme of the particular fair. So this is an air performance with our air costumes, and a fire performance with fire costumes. Now, being a Leo, I did lots of fire performances. I think this might have been a phoenix that was then burnt, and I love doing these things with fire. I climbed the towers, so I had fire on my head. So I did a lot of performances with fire on my head. And this is the Moon Fair. So I went to my childhood, where I used to go on holiday as a child, in Walton on the Naze in Essex, with a bucket on a train. I didn't often go anywhere on my own in those days, and I got a load of seaweed. I think I actually wore the seaweed for one of the Andrew Logan things as swimwear. And then here's the Rainbow Fair. So by now, to begin with the costumes, I'd go to market stalls and buy, you know, artificial fabrics and beautiful fabrics. But now I started to dye things. I bought unbleached calico and muslin, and it's like dip dyeing, and I did sew dyeing and tie dyeing. Where have we gone? And I bleached my hair nearly white. And so I used to do, put my hair, colour for my hair that suited the theme of the fair. And there's me making, by now we've moved to Norfolk, and we had a lovely bit of ground outside. And so there's me sitting in the garden, sewing the costumes. And that's one of the tie-dye ones. I did all the beautiful circles on it. And it was a bit, you know, it was a bit upsetting for me when this, so this is the cover of the catalogue for the exhibition he had in Camden. And it was like these costumes were 3 of my costumes on the end wall, and it didn't say that I'd made them. So I considered all my costume making to be an art form. It was my art then, and you know, all these patterns and things. I made one with a tree on it, and so it was, again, it was upsetting not to be credited. Now this performance, this is one of the Rougham Tree Fairs. This is a zodiac performance. So I say we worked in a circle, and so here, please remember this, I had these zodiac signs, painted the colours of the element of the zodiac sign, and zodiacs became very important to me. And at the same time, we were going out to ancient sites and doing things that we felt right to do there. We had a 3-ton yellow telecom truck. So we go around with all our props and things in it. And we get to a place and think, what do we feel we want to do at this place? And then just sort of do it for the camera without people being there. This was a maiden castle in Dorset and just celebrating the sunrise. And this is the Uffington White Horse, which is near Wellion Smithy, and a sort of ritual scouring of the White Horse. And then down in Cornwall, this was a morning ceremony welcoming the sun. And this became a bit of a classic, this photograph. It sort of appeared in books. And what we do, we'd do it for real. And one thing that was happening to me now was that the performances were becoming real. And without knowing it, I was going through some sort of self-initiation into some sort of spirituality and woman magic. And so we did these things for real, and then we do it again for the camera, because as we were being funded by the Arts Council, we had to document everything, and then later put that on the walls of exhibitions. And this is another thing that I just did on myself. It's Penmaen Mawr Stone Circle in North Wales. I did a whole sequence of, like I called them light paintings. Some of them were done with electric torches, some sort of outlining the stones or just going around the stones like this, and some were with flaming torches. And these were exhibited in a gallery in Brighton. And then I became very interested in landscape zodiacs, terrestrial zodiacs. And in the 1930s, a woman called Kathleen Mortwood had discovered the zodiac signs laid out on the earth around in the Glastonbury area, known as the Glastonbury zodiac. And then people began, in the 70s, sort of discovering them everywhere. It's like the figures, I think she went up in a plane and took photographs, and it's like if you laid the sort of plan and the map of all these figures and put a planisphere over it, they all corresponded, they were all in the right order. Whether they're real, whether people believe them or not, it was something that meant a lot to me. They felt very real to me. And we went round the Glastonbury Zodiac in 4 days and doing like 3 signs a day. And this one was on Wimble-Toot, and it's the Virgo sign. And then when we moved to Norfolk, somebody said there was one around the Bury St Edmunds area. So we moved there, so instead of doing it continuously, we went to each sign at the right time of year. So this is the Scorpio of the Bury St Edmunds Zodiac. Now at this point, because it was all becoming real for me, I was sort of giving up wearing costumes at places and just wearing ordinary clothes and taking these objects. And then we had several exhibitions, with 2 in London at the Acme Gallery, and I did all these wall panels, so this was all the documentation, and these in a sense were my artworks, and that's about the Glastonbury Zodiac. And we lived in the gallery, and when we moved to Norfolk we had our goats out the back as well, and well, they couldn't, I had to be milked, you know. And it's amazing how we were allowed to do this. We always, even when we did the shows, we always insisted in staying and living in the place. And even we did one at the Serpentine Gallery, which I'll come to. And I mean, we had to be locked in, and they closed the park at night, but they let us stay in there. And then every night we did a performance. And at the Acme Gallery, they cut a hole in the ceiling right through the upper gallery, so we could climb up this tower that then went up in the upper gallery and out through the roof. We used to blow conch shells and things. And this was the Serpentine one. I think there were several different people in different rooms, but we called ours the Cycles of the Serpent, and it was celebrating the first year that we lived in the country. And so this is one of my air costumes. I had these figures on this serpentine creature, and these zodiac signs that I mentioned before. Now, so I got to this point where I wanted to go off on my own. I didn't want to, the sites we'd visited became very deeply important to me, and I didn't just sort of want to go off and go around with Bruce to these places. I just wanted to go off on my own. So I started to go off for several days. I'd sleep out at places and just be with the place. And so this is like one of the last pictures of me. I think this is at Wayland Smithy. So I didn't take photographs, we didn't have selfies in those days. And then because I wanted to communicate with people what I'd experienced in places, I started to do these simple pastel artworks. And so when I was in Longbarrows, I had this experience very often of there being like an old wise woman who sometimes was maybe shut up. She was like an oracle, and she was shut inside, and then a few days later they'd open it up and she'd tell the tribe what she'd experienced. And I quite often felt as though that was me. It was sort of living it, as though I was experiencing what these old women had felt. And so after having done that, gone off to places for a few days at a time and slept out, I used to get called to places, and I got called to go to Callanish on the Isle of Lewis, and there were several of my friends who had been up for a couple of years before doing things up there, and I wanted to go, but I felt I can't just go like a tourist and be up there. So I had to make this journey. So I did this journey up. I saw Britain as like a figure of a goddess lying in the sea. And at this time, I was studying practicing the Buddhist, Tibetan Buddhist Dzogchen practices. And there was one which was like a purification practice. And so these places, it's not like a chakra system, but it's like the places on one's body where one visualises when one does this particular practice. So I started off down here. So Bosquanoon in Cornwall is the feet. Glastonbury was just a place that I paused at, because I found quite often on journeys and in life, Glastonbury was a place to sort of stop and think, and what am I doing, and get clear about what I was actually doing. And Avebury was like the base, Arborough was the solar plexus or the centre, Castlereagh was the heart, Dumfries, the 12 apostles, was the throat, and then Callanish was the brow of this journey. So I set out with this, and my companion on this journey, I called the frock. So this was a garment that I put on. It didn't have, I've got it here. It didn't have a head. I mean, my head was in it. I won't put it on just now. Which way around it is? That way. So this was my companion, the frock, so all these years later. So I had on there the Tibetan symbols for the different places. And whenever I got to one of the sites, I'd do the practice, and I was visualizing the places in my body when I was in those places in the land, and I found that it was as though the land was becoming me and the land was becoming the same being. And at each place, when I'd done the practice, I took the symbol off and put it somewhere, and then I took something like a tiny plant and sewed it back on in place. And these, I mean, they've all gone now. It was like living on Lewis. It was all the moth got the plants. So this was when it was at Boscawen in Cornwall at the feet. And then at Castlereagh was the heart, was a beautiful place for me. So you can see here that I'd taken all these off and I'd replaced them with plants. And then I did, so all I was photographing was the frock in these different places. And so she became like a woman, so this travelling company, well, like a goddess maybe. In some places she was like a maiden, in some places she was like a mature woman. And so this is they were very early, very simple pictures, but they seemed to contain the energy of what I was experiencing with her and how she appeared. And when I got to 12 Apostles near Dumfries, it was, I did the thing. It was, I sort of had my relationship with the stone circle there. It was very near a lot of houses, and I stayed there for several days, and every night I would walk about 5 miles out to a sacred site nearby. And this was a well, and when I got there, it was like in a wood, and I slept there, and it was one of the most magical nights of my life. I thought there was fairies around, and I'd hear foxes and all sorts of things. And this beautiful well, and I did a practice there early in the morning, and there were these stones around it, and it seemed as though there were these old wise women, the spirits of them being there and sort of just keeping me company and saying, it's all right what you're doing, you're doing well. And then I got to the brow and to Callanish. This is a later picture. And I didn't actually sort of finish my journey in the main circle. I went to one known as Circle 3 because it was a bit more private and less touristy. And then walked on the Sleeping Beauty. Now this is the Sleeping Beauty mountain in the Park Hills on Lewis. And you can see she's amazing. Can you see she's got this face with a nose and a throat and breasts and knees. You can see her from lots of parts of Lewis. And the amazing, this is a recent photograph, I think probably, did Jane take that? And the amazing thing about her is that every 18.6 years at the southerly lunar standstill, the moon is rising so low that it actually rises out of her body and moves along and sort of seems to look down on her face. And then a little bit, it sort of disappears, and a little bit later, when you're standing at the end of the avenue of the main Callanish circle, the moon appears right in the centre of the circle. So she's very, very real and very important to me, this mountain. And so we walked with a few other people, we walked on the mountain. This picture I did of the last standstill, and where it was amazing because this seemed to make like a bridge, a pathway, so the lunar energy was coming to us who were watching. So walking on her and getting to her brow and lying down and putting my brow on her brow, it was as though that journey I just made, that land becoming me, then became her as well. So the three things became one. There was me, there was the land, and there was the mountain. And that was a very, very, profound experience. So what did I do then? I'd made that whole journey up the land, and I got to Callanish, and as I stepped off the ferry onto Lewis, onto Harris it was, and then I walked up to Lewis, I felt as though I'd come home. I mean, it was me, a Londoner, who just sort of moved to Norfolk, and I wasn't looking for a home, although I'd made myself sort of homeless by doing this journey. And coming back, I had to go back down, and I was homeless, and I lived in somebody's caravan, and I had nothing. I'd left all my possessions and all the things that I did performances with, and didn't really know what I was doing. So I haven't got any photographs of this experience, but for a whole winter, I went right down into the depths, and it was as though every atom of my being was just being smashed apart, and I managed to keep myself together by turning it into another journey. So every dark moon and full moon, I went to either like a chamber cairn or a long barrow or to a well, and just having that sense of being on a journey, I was able to like put all the atoms back together again, and it was becoming like a new me. But it wasn't really new, it was like I was becoming the real me. And then at the end of that, I did a lot of writing, and there was a wonderful woman who died recently called Jan Dungy, and she did a lot of things with women's groups in Norwich, and she got a house that became a women's centre. We had this exhibition called Arting About, and I got a little space under the stairs, and I turned it into a cave, and I had my writings and all sorts of plants and bits of ephemera on the walls. And sometimes I just sat there, like the crone in the cave or in the long barrow. But other times people would just come and sit there themselves. So it was like all my journeys somehow. Oh yes, the previous journey, the one up to Lewis. I'd done those drawings I exhibited in a cafe in Norwich. So everything was exhibited in somewhere or another, so people could sit and read all the writings. And by then my hair had been cut off, all my blonde hair. A friend of mine had said, I want to cut the blonde off, so she just cut it off, so I was back to having dark hair again, and a new identity. So what did I do then? Then I wanted to do another journey. So here this is the land again. So the summer of 1983, I set off again, and I went up to Callanish for the summer solstice, and then I'd been called to go to Orkney. And this journey, although it doesn't look like it, what it felt like was like a double spiral, like a sort of a helix sort of journey. And what I was doing, I was going to certain ancient sites, but then I was also going to places that they seemed to just turn up. They were to do with war, or to do with nuclear power stations and energies. And I was getting very into the peace movement at this point. And I felt that by going to the ancient sites, I was somehow sort of healing something, healing the thing to do with war and nuclear energy. So you can see that there's like Maze House, Skara Braid, Ring of Brogdar, and so all these places that were ancient places. And then I went for a guided tour around Dounreay, which was open then, which is a bizarre experience. And there's this Scarpa flow and all the war connections there, and other places that were to do with this Torness there. And then I knew about some people who were doing something called the Walk for Life, which they were walking from Faz Lane to Greenham Common, and on a peace walk. And I thought I ought to join them at some point. And so when they got to Coventry Cathedral, the old one that was bombed out, that's when I sort of coincided with them and joined them. And then I walked on with them, but I'd go off to ancient sites like the Rollright stones if they sort of cropped up. And it was as though it was like two rivers meeting. You know, they'd been doing their journey and I'd been doing mine, and then we joined together and walked on and walked to Greenham. Oh yes, one thing I wanted to say about the exhibition in the Arting About exhibition, the women's exhibition. One of the things that was very important to me was that to realise what women's art was. That there was all these women who were just, some of them were housewives, not artists, and they produced the most wonderful work. But it was things like also, it was like how, realising how women do art in their own lives. You know, it's even how you arrange things on objects on a window ledge or something can be art. And that was very important to me. It was quite an eye-opener about what art can be. So we got to Greenham, and that was the end of that journey. And right. What I did on this journey from Orkney down to Greenham, I didn't have a camera with me at all that time. Although I'd taken loads of photographs when we were doing the performance work and photographing sunrises and things, I wanted to experience things without looking through, the lens of a camera. And I just wanted to actually experience something totally for real. But to mark this journey, I sent a sequence of postcards to a friend of mine in East Anglia. And sometimes it was if I could get a postcard of where I'd been, or sometimes I had to draw them, sometimes I did little collages. So there was this whole collection. It was it was a form of postal art that was, to do with this journey. And she gave them back to me at the end. So I've got them all still. So then the people who, years ago, while I was still performing, I've been talking to a woman, Stephanie Smith, and we're talking about Arborough, the Arborough Stone Circle in Derbyshire, and she said, do you know about the Gypsy Switch? No. So she sent me this plan. Now, someone had been told about this journey, supposedly by an old man at Glastonbury, and somebody had done all these other things. But this was like a zodiac journey round Britain. And when she goes, because I've been doing all these zodiac performances and going to the terrestrial zodiacs, this meant, it really rang bells with me. God, this is something I've got to do sometime. But then it hadn't been, working with Bruce, it hadn't been the right time. So I carried this bit of paper with me wherever I went through all these moves and things. And at the end of the Walk for Life and my journey, all the people on it wanted to stay together. They'd become like a community, and they wanted to do something else. And we had a big meeting, and I told them about the Gypsy Switch. And so a lot of people got really excited. Right, yeah, let's do that. Let's travel the Gypsy Switch, and we'll do it in a vehicle, and we can turn it into a theatre, and we can do peace theatre. And so we set off trying to plan this. But as we planned it, more and more people dropped out because the commitment of doing something for a year, really, they began to realise what commitment that was. And it dwindled down to a very small group of people. We kept on, and the whole plans for doing it with a vehicle fell through. So we thought, it's a horse journey. And we were had been told, that it was like a journey that traditional travelling people did, going around horse fairs, buying and selling horses. So we had to do it with horses. And when we laid the thing on an actual map, it was like that way round. And it was like this egg shape. So it's like an egg in the womb of Britain. So we planned to do it. And there's an awful lot about how we went about it and all the mishaps in the book. So this is jumping on a bit, but this is how we travelled. So to begin, I just had my fourth child then in a teepee in Tally Valley in Wales. And so this was the first year of his life. And so it really boiled down to, there was me with this and my baby with this wagon. It's actually a flatbed trolley. with a hazel bender on it with this blue tarp. And this was Mike. There was Mike Andrews. He had this little one with a sort of canvas tarp on it. And another guy called Richard Ford travelled with us. And then other people came and went. So it was like, it was a journey that had its own identity, but various people sort of came and went as we travelled. And we put this banner on the back, and every time we got to a different place, we filled it in. And we also collected money for Oxfam. And this is, at the beginning, we were going through with Virgo. We hadn't really got onto the Gypsy Switch journey yet. Originally we intended to go to the middle and then go up to Appleby Fair in June, but we were so behind. We set off still trying to get to the middle, but that didn't work out, so we decided to head for Lincoln. And sort of travelling across the Bedford levels, I think, and it was at the harvest time. And I just had this lovely moment. It's my harvest. So there's my baby and some things that I sort of collected for, from the edge of the thing, things that hadn't been harvested, my bunch of wheat that I could use in future performances. So it's my harvest. And then, a bizarre thing in a way, but once it was established, that the journey had begun and people were travelling, I went off something that I'd planned and went to Uluru in Australia. My friend Lynn Wood, she's also now died. And it felt as though I was still part of the Gypsy Switch. So the others were still travelling around the land, but I'd travel around the world. It was like this circle around the world. And when they were having the autumn equinox in Britain, I was having the spring equinox in Australia. And that was it helped my understanding, being there where, the Aboriginal people were still travelling their dreaming paths, even though they did it in trucks, and celebrating everything. And it just sort of, I don't know, it came into me like a form of osmosis, it's like a sort of teaching, not a verbal teaching, but just by being in the land. I was learning a lot that I then understood my own land better when I got back to it. And I applied for a performance training bursary from the Arts Council to go out there. So, and this is one of the first things I'd applied on my own, to get. So it was great. And then I went back and joined up with them again. And we got to the point where we were having to cross London. And we went across, I think traditionally they might have gone across London Bridge, but we went across Tower Bridge. And it was the most incredible day because we went from one side of London to the other. We were going down to Kingston-on-Thames. And the traffic had to stop for us. We had the right of way. And it was just, the traffic just sort of fell away and we went through. So this is Mike with his Rosie. And there's me, and you can't quite, my pony was called Polly. You can't quite see her there. And then, one of the big things I was doing on this journey around the zodiac was I took all those signs with me, those wooden signs that I'd had in my zodiac performances. And in each zodiac section of the land, we left the appropriate one there. So this is Capricorn at the Swallowhead Spring in Wiltshire by Avebury. That's how it was then. Now people have kind of turned it into an actual shrine, but it's beautiful. It's like at Imbolc, the water starts bubbling up. And we put the sign in a hollow tree. And then there's Mike with the Sagittarius. So at Kingston-on-Thames, that's the King's Stone in Kingston-on-Thames, where various kings were crowned in the past. And so he's got the Sagittarius sign and burning fire on it. And then when we got to Anglesey, which was Aries, so Richard was an Aries, and he has the sign, and we buried it in the gorse bush, which looks sort of fiery. And then my baby then my Taliesin, was a year old, and we were on the Appleby Fair Hill when the fair, the people, all the travelling people came together for the Appleby Fair, horse fair. And we slept up on the hill, and there he is with his Gemini sign, because he was a Gemini. That was wonderful. We were very accepted. They all thought they didn't know what I was. You know, I arrived on the day that the people were arriving, and they'd come from all over, all different parts of the country. They didn't quite know what to make of me, but they were really good. There was young boys sort of came and talked to us in our tent, and you know, when I said I've got to put the baby to bed, you know, they went, you know, and the woman the next morning said, "Oh, we were worried about you up there, you know, I was going to ask my husband to build a shelter for you out the back," and she said, "If ever you don't want the baby, give him to a gypsy," you know. That was and this is how. So we travelled with the horses and wagons until we got to, it was very difficult getting to West Wales, and all the others wanted to drop out. The others all dropped out. So I sold my flatbed trolley, I sold my pony, and I walked the rest. So I had to sort of go over to Ireland because that was the Taurus, and then came back and got up to Castlereagh again. And then I just walked from Cumbria right across the Pennines to Durham, York, and then down to Lincoln, and then a bit further on from Lincoln. And I just got it down to a sort of a fine art. If I didn't carry even a sort of piece of paper that I didn't need, and you know, I used to buy his nappies, and I sort of took them out the packet and found all sort of crevices in the rucksack to put them in, and his baby food. He was on sort of powdered baby food then. And I used to take it out of the box, you know, open the packets, get all the air out so that I could squeeze it down into the rucksack. And I mean, that's the kitchen sink, that sort of margarine tub, so that's where we did the washing up. And so he quite often did all the washing up for me. So I didn't sort of document the journey. I documented him. So I did this series after it had finished. I stayed in somebody's flat in London, and I was going to have an exhibition with my friend Lynn, and for sort of 12 days, well, it was sort of 13, every night I did a picture trying to capture and explain to people what I'd experienced on this journey. So this is the Virgo, and you're travelling through sort of land that you didn't see the back streets, where you saw really all the chemicals that were put into the land, and it felt as though, you know, the earth was being forced to overproduce to feed the rich West, and you know, the other half of the world was starving. So that's what that one's all about. And then this is me. This is the Libra one. Me going round, you know, them up in Britain, and me down with the red rock, the circle around the earth. And then I came back and joined them for Scorpio, and again walked that's the plan of the Saffron Walden Maze, and I walked that at sunrise or dawn before sunrise, and had the sense again of this like old crone under the earth, you know, waiting, you know, the spirit of winter really. And before we got to Kingston, we parked up in Essex on an amazing bit of land, it was all flat, and there was just this slight rise, which had been a churchyard, and I was parked up under this wonderful yew tree, and I felt very enclosed by her, and as though I was some little creature in her roots, like a little shrew in the land, you know, sleeping, hibernating, or a little fetus. So that was my experience really of Sagittarius, and there he is firing his arrow into the new year. And then, so Capricorn, that was as though I was inside the Swallowhead Spring, and there's the goat and the candle, and that's the tree. It was a hollow tree that we put the sign in. And I did 2 pictures of Aquarius. We got to Glastonbury, and we stayed for too long really, quite a few weeks, near Glastonbury, and it was snowy a lot of the time. And I didn't want to go off on the tour until the snow had gone and the green came. So that was I'll never know which of these I prefer, so that's both my Aquarius pictures. And the Pisces was West Wales, and I was staying with someone who was a Pisces, and he took me to this it was a big lake with some islands in the centre, and this island, it was quite a long way out, and he was a Pisces, so he had to do something with the sign, and he stood, it was a very sort of boggy bank of the lake, and there was all overhanging trees, but he got this sign and he sort of threw it. And I don't know, it just, something caught it, and it just flew on and on and on, and it landed on this island, which is amazing. And then I had to get up to Anglesey, and somebody actually drove us up to Anglesey to be there at the right time. And this was just the feeling of that journey, the landscape as we travelled up West Wales. It was all like that bracken and green and sort of wet rock, and then went into some of these wonderful chamber cairns on Anglesey. And then I went to Tara in Ireland for Taurus, and she's a sort of cow-headed Darkini of still dancing the old year, the winter. You know, there's the Maiden of Spring. And there's Appleby Fair Hill. The landscape at that time was like a patchwork, because they were taking, you know, hay off and silage off, and all the different fields and patches were all different colours. So it was as though she was wearing this patchwork coat and calling all the people into her over the, from all over different parts of the country. And she held in her hands the winds of the four directions, and these were colours that I found in a lovely sort of written piece in an old book about the Hebrides. So they're the Hebridean winds. And then Durham, I felt that part of Durham that was surrounded, almost completely surrounded by the river, was like an island, and it was like a serpent. So there we were. And York, which is Leo, it took me a long time to find what I felt was the sacred place in York, and I sort of came then to find it was where the two rivers sort of came together and become one. So it was a very sort of female image. And there was it was just like a paved area where the two came together. And so she's the harvest mother. And I had a friend who shared the same birthday as mine took me out to this place called Duggleby Howe, which is the biggest tumulus in Britain, like, because Silbury Hill isn't a tumulus. So that was and then I stayed in this flat in London, and with Lynn. She had one room and I had another. I exhibited all those pictures around the room with photographs and writings that I'd done for that whole year, and then I enacted the journey in the gallery. And that's how it was left, with, you know, people just sitting around and kind of meditating on it, and then left it there for the course of the exhibition. You can see all the writings and the pictures. Yeah. And then after I stayed the winter down in Wales, so I'd felt that the Hebrides was my home and I had to live there, and eventually I made it. So I lived in Grava on the east side of the Isle of Lewis for 10 years. And this is my lovely house. It was an ex-Church of Scotland mission house and hall. And it was all corrugated. It was very strong. It stood up to the winds, and we lived without electricity, because I'd lived without electricity for how many years before that, you know. And I was going to have it put on, and I thought, well, I don't need it, do I? You know. And we had like one cold tap. And this is the beautiful hall. I mean, I had this lovely hall, and so I could exhibit there every year and exhibit all my work, and people came from all over, and you know, bought things. And we only had 2 buses a week in that time, and so if people hadn't got a car, they came and they had to stay with me. So I felt that's why I'm there, you know, I'm to share this place with people. And when we were, so when I say we, that's me and my son. we didn't really go off on a lot of physical. I thought I would be based there and go off on journeys, but the journey was on Lewis and Harris. So we celebrated like the turning cycle of the year, like the equinoxes, you know, and the 4 Celtic fire festivals, Beltane, Lammas or Lugnasad, and Samhain and Imbolc. So we go to the same places at the same time each year. So we were making like the same journey over and over, year after year, for 10 years, and it was sort of deepening that journey. But it wasn't so much like a deepening the circle as creating a spiral. And so I did a whole sequence of pictures of all those 8 festivals. So this is a beautiful place called Bride's Well, or Tobernan Bridge, up at Ness on the Isle of Lewis. And this lovely well that the water is always flowing. And there used to be an old lady living nearby. I always felt somebody must be, you know, a guardian of this well. And she told me that her and another lady had always looked after it. And you have to go now, and sometimes it used to have a little fence around it with a gate in, but now it's all open and it tends to get a bit sort of clogged up, but you just clear it. So we go there every Imbolc at the end of January, 1st of February, and there's somebody had put like a sign of, you know, a horseshoe, because Bridget is the goddess of smithcraft and the poetic inspiration and many other things. There's a lot about all these things, like her, and in my other book, Mother of the Isles, that's got lots of legends and the relationship between myths and legends and landscape. So, and then this is her. This is this well again at one. It's still the same. There's an old saying. I think it was sort of Scottish and Hebridean saying that early on bride's morn, the serpent shall come from the hole. I will not hurt the serpent, and the serpent will not hurt me. So I felt that the serpent was like the life force, the spring beginning to come into the land. And sometimes we go, and so for the equinox, we go to the main circle at Callanish. And I always felt that, I mean, some people say that's a Celtic cross, but I feel that it's like a dancing figure, and it's like reaches out one hand and sort of catches the sun as it rises and juggles it, throws it over and catches it in the other hand at sunset. And this is one of the stones that I see as a sort of spring maiden waiting. She's just right, and that's her again. And these 3 I see as the mother, the maiden, and the crone. Sunrise on the equinox, spring equinox. And Beltane, there's this amazing figure on one of the stones. It looks like this horned god. And there's a I don't know if it's a painting or a carving at a country called, some place called Valcamonica. I'm not sure if it's in Portugal or Spain. And it's very, very similar to that. So I just wonder whether that's a natural thing on the stone or whether it was kind of pecked out. And there's stories connecting the cuckoo to the May morn. If you hear your first cuckoo in the Callanish stones on May morn, it's very auspicious. There's a lot, and that sort of shape appeared in the clouds one Beltane. And the summer solstice, that's just one of my pictures of the sun rising on the summer solstice in the stones. And a friend of mine once watched from the south as the sun was rising and said that the flat surface of the main stone of Callanish, main circle, was like a mirror. It sort of reflected the rising sun. And then the Sleeping Beauty mountain has another aspect that's very amazing, in that there's a mountain behind her on Harris, and when you see her from different places as you go across the island, her form, it changes her form. So there's a recumbent circle at Achmore, and when you're up there, she appears pregnant. And I always feel that must surely have been there, like a place to celebrate the harvest. So that's where I go to celebrate my harvest. And also, my friend Lynn pointed this out, when you sort of walk up the road and see the stones in profile, they also have this shape of a woman with feet at the end, and there's a cairn, the remains of a cairn in the centre. It's like the womb. And then in the autumn equinox, that same stone that was my spring maiden, she seems to turn the other way and look towards the winter and turning towards the dark. Right. And that's again, that's another cloud figure that appeared, and that was at sunset on the equinox, and it's sort of catching the fire of the sun, as it says. And then for Samhain, like Halloween, there's another mountain on Harris, on South Harris, that we call the Hag Mountain, and she really is this incredible shape. And so I try to go there, and when the sun sets, it's like a sort of curtain moving across her, and she's very, very rocky and sort of cold and hard. And then the winter solstice, I always feel that at night, or on some of these occasions, is that the stones are really like the grandmothers, and they seem to close in and become a tighter circle. And again, there's this, the wise woman sitting and meditating there. And just another winter one. Somebody asked me to do this as a commission. She used to visit me, an American woman. She said, she told me about this vision that she'd had, and can you do a picture of it for me? And so I did, and she was quite happy. And I thought, and her power animal was a wolf, and I thought, well, there's no wolves at Callanish, but I was walking along the outside of the avenue one day, and I saw that image in the stone. So I put that in the moon, and I didn't know at that time that the wolf month is that is the name of the month in the Hebrides. And the gathering, so they just look like a gathering of people. I went there once with some people who'd come up, and we went sort of in the dark, in the snow, and we were walking up beside the avenue, and this woman said, because it was, you had to go through a fence and go through a gate, and she said, how did all those people get in there? And she was kind of mortified when she realised that it was the stones, but I thought it was wonderful that she thought the stones were people. And I always connect the salmon with the stones, because the Lewisian gneiss has this sort of pink and grey and black and white, and it's like the flesh of the salmon. And this is my dear old grandmother turtle. There's this rocky formation to the south of the stones, and she just looks like an old grandmother turtle. And I think they've done archaeology, they've done archaeology there, and it was, I think there were poles, like totem poles there in the fireplace. It was like a sacred spot. And I used to sit like there, and they're looking to the north and thinking, well, this was here before the stones were here. And one night I sat down and I thought, there must be a story. What's the story of old grandmother turtle? And I just sat down and wrote this story, and I never changed a word of it. And I felt that she'd told it to me. She'd whispered in my ear. So that whole year's turning that I did for 10 years, at the same time I was writing poetry. I'd started a little bit when I was in East Anglia, because when I wrote, normally I just wrote all this stuff and wrote and sent letters, long letters to people. It was all a bit wild. So I started to sort of hone it all down and write poems. And so then when I was in Glastonbury later, I recorded this CD of all the poems. And I used to tour this around. I used to do slideshows of the poems with pictures, some of my photographs and my artwork. And also then later, when I wrote the book, The Callanish Dance, that is very largely about this whole turning of the cycle of the year when we were up on Lewis. And then when it came to the last lunar standstill, the first one I'd seen was 1987, and so then it was again in 2006. I'd done this whole sequence of pictures and I exhibited them along the sort of upper gallery, well, upper wall in the Atlanta Arts Centre in Stornoway, and the others were in the Callanish Visitor Centre at Callanish. And so there was this whole sequence. This one was dreaming. I thought that the mountain was lying there, sort of dreaming of when the moon would come. And this is sort of very much how it appears when, I say it rises out of her body, like between, goes along and then it rises up. And it seems as though they're looking at each other, and that's her shining brow. And then after 10 years, everything was sort of changing. My son was 12. People moved away that we were friends with. I couldn't get colour photocopying done, and I don't know, it seemed time to move on. So I went to Glastonbury, which is always seemed like my second home. And I think what I thought was my best pastel artwork while I was there. And so this is like the Cretan labyrinth, many people think, in those bridges on Glastonbury Tor. And again, I was still, so Bride or Bridge is very important to me, and that was her again at Avebury, this time at the Swallowhead Spring, and at the Chalice Well. The Chalice Well meant an awful lot to me. I used to go and spend a lot of time just sitting there, and this is the waterfall and Chalice Well Gardens, and like the yew tree, which seemed to be a guardian of it. And this one, I'd always associated horses with Beltane, and so this is the Sleeping Beauty and the Uffington White Horse, and the Sleeping Beauty, like that, is because I went to one of the Glastonbury festivals and recreated her. She was about 60 foot long, so I got all this earth dumped and I carved the shape of her there, and with another friend we had a whole thing laid out on the ground and we did performances. So this is her head, you can see the shape of her face there, and then I put sort of all ropes down for her hair and all these patterns in stones that I then had in that previous picture. And my son, he did want to go off and do a few landscape journeys, and he got very into the white horses in Wiltshire and said, like, can we do a white horse gypsy switch? So we went to Wiltshire and we walked between all the white horses in Wiltshire, and we had T-shirts we'd done a drawing sort of together. It was a bit of him and a bit of me, so we wore these T-shirts at every white horse we went to, and we had this banner. I've got a banner here somewhere. Oh yes, I forgot to show you that. Trying to tie-dye things, my sew dyes, so that's the banner. So wherever all the white horses, we flew it or laid it on the ground. So that was an actual, I forgot to show you this. So when on the Gypsy Switch, when I was travelling with the tent, so this is one that I had it, whoops, upside down, either on the tent or on the back of the rucksack, so that I still carried on with that and filled it all in. With my little thing. And then at the end of that journey, we're carrying on with the theme of picnic. It was Tally's 9th birthday, so we invited people to come for a birthday party and asked them all to bring something to do with horses. And I made the cakes with all the horses that we'd just been to. And then I don't know why that one's there. That should have been somewhere else. Never mind, forget about that one. That's it. That's a Glastonbury picture. Oh, these are all pictures I did when I was at Glastonbury. Oh yeah, sorry, it's my fault. We've been rearranging slides. I'll just go back a bit, if I may. Yeah, because the thing is that sorry, go back. Yeah. It's jumping back a bit in time, this one. I just put it in because of that horse picture. We then went outside into our garden and we carved our version of the Uffington White Horse in our garden and called it the gravel white horse, and we libated it with white horse whiskey. And yeah, so this is carrying on with some of the pictures that I did when I was in Glastonbury. The sort of harvest mothers. And again, it's that same image that I keep coming back to of the wise crone in the winter mound. And this one is, I always felt this woman was this old ancient grandmother sitting in the Chalice-Well Gardens. So I called that sort of older even thee than I. And this is like the cauldron of Ceridwen. It was like a great ancient sort of creation figure in the universe, you know, having galaxies in her womb. And while we were there was an eclipse of the sun. We didn't go down to Cornwall where it was total, but we sat on Glastonbury Tor and it went this strange green light. And that was my feeling about the sun and the moon. And then there was the millennium. So this is my mother of the millennium. And in Glastonbury, there were places that you could hire, and I had all these exhibitions, and I hired places, and I could give talks. So I did a lot while I was there. I wrote my 2 first books, and they're lovely spaces. And then my son, we went through education, and then he moved to Norwich, and I came back to Lewis. And I haven't done a lot of journeys since I've been back there, but this is one I just got called to do, like I called it my year of the kayak. And there's lots of legends about the kayak Vera. She's the mother of winter and the creation of landscapes. And again, lots of pictures in that book of mine. So I got called to go to certain places. And I had 2 goes at getting to the kayak and boddock house in Glen Lyon. These are the 2 figures. You know, they take them out for the winter. Well, they take them out for the summer, out of their house. They've got a little house built for them, and then they put them back for the winter. And the people, I think, when they used to go to the Sheelings, they used to ask for blessings on the animals for the summer, and then the gypsies took over doing this, looking after them. And there's a group of local people now who still carry it on. And with a friend, went to Ireland, and there were lots of sites with legends associated with the kayak there. This is the Hag's Head on the cliffs of Moher. We were looking for her, but we almost found her by mistake. It was a wonderful discovery. And the stone of Beera, the Beera stone on the Beera Peninsula, there's a lot of legend. One of the legends about the kayak Vera is that when the summer comes, she turns herself to stone, and the stone is always wet, so it's got her spirit in it. But here in Ireland, it's become a bit Christianised, and she offended a saint, and he turned her to stone. People go and give a lot of offerings to her. And this one has got Lapacali, the bed of the kayak, surrounded by trees with crows in them. And the Corrie Wrekin near Mull. So I went to see that. I didn't see it at its most incredible. This is the cauldron of Ceridwen. And she goes, as the winter comes, she goes to the Corrie Wrekin and she washes her plaid in the cauldron. And when she's done finishing it, the land has turned, it's bleached white, so it's gone to covered in snow. And I'm still carrying on with my picnic as an art form. And when I was 70, I had this picnic in the Ackmore Stone Circle, and I invited lots of people to come, and I made this cake version of the Sleeping Beauty, and unveiled her, and then I gave her cesarean, and her womb was full of jelly babies. And then, you know, cut bits off and gave them to people. There's a lot more that happened there, and then when, you know, it was getting a bit sort of funny I gave the head to somebody, but then I thought it was getting a bit not really good enough to give away, so I sort of laid her out in my garden, and, you know, she just went to the birds and the weather, and then she was gone. And I haven't, when lockdown and COVID came, I had a lot of family things I had to deal with, and it sort of killed my creativity off for a while. And I didn't do many pictures, but this was one. So it was so desperate search of hope, and that's the light at the end of the tunnel. And so I'm still going. I still keep going. So the Dark Skies Festival on the Isle of Lewis, based in the Atlanta Arts Centre. It's the 4th one this year. And this year they decided to have an exhibition, like a Dark Skies exhibition. They called for proposals from artists. So I sent in my proposal and it was accepted. And this is so very different from everything else I'm doing. So this is my black hole. And because it's matte black, and because, you know, light can't escape from a black hole, it's got this heart drawn on it and all these words in a spiral, but because they're black on black, you can't see them. But I did put it there. So it's in the heart of the galaxy is a black hole. A black hole is not a hole, it's a matter so dense that even light cannot escape its gravity. There is no light at the end of the tunnel. That isn't meant to be negative. It's because, you know, some people think that a black hole is like a tunnel, and you can go through it into another reality or another universe, but I don't think you could. But and I still celebrate the turning cycles of the year, but I do it in my own quiet way. But these things can be very potent. And this is going back to Brideswell this year with Fiona from this gallery or this centre. And so I was just explaining what I do. Well, I usually go there on my own, but sometimes with groups of women. And I go down on the shore and usually find these bits of driftwood, and lots of them, they look like goddesses, or they look like the Callanish stones. So this is one I've had for very many years. And I'll put these objects down there and light candles. Oops, she's fallen in. But it's all right, she floats. It's beautiful, beautiful water here. So what am I doing now? What am I getting out next? Out of my bag. So this is my candle. It was incredibly windy this year, you know. I mean, sometimes it's lovely and still and I can light candles in there. But we had a go, and Ian was there, and he tried to light it, and I tried to light it. But Fiona had a go, and there was just a little flicker for about a second. It caught a light. Yeah. And it is what, I mean, the old lady told me that this water is ever so clear and ever so pure, and it never goes dry. And in the days when people depended on wells, people would come from miles around with their bucket and sit for hours, you know, sort of filling their bucket. And it was, there we go. And what I do, one thing I do, is I keep this sort of cycle going. I take water back each year, and so then the following year I take some of the water from the previous year and I give it back, and then I take the current year's water, that I will take some of it back the next year. So it's like a cycle that keeps going. I used to do that visiting sites in the country, of taking something from one place to another and sort of keeping this link between the two. You're getting blown to bits. I didn't know you'd film this at the time, you know, I was just talking away. Yeah. Explaining what I was doing.
The audio was just...
Yeah. Right. And so we came here, and so this was yesterday. It's so incredible to be back. It's so incredible that, having been in those, well, in that early time, being written out of something, and this has happened to me in a lot that I've done since. not really the things I've done myself. People know about the things that I've done since I left Bruce, but there was a lot of things I did with him, and you know, the archive's gone to the Tate, but a lot of the things that that sort of I've got a few things, and somehow I'm not really in that archive as much as I should be. But it's beautiful to come here and be invited to do this, do a performance, and so I did. You know, there I'm sitting waiting for the people to go in, and so I created this spiral that's still downstairs, and it was like going in as an old woman and going this sort of darkness of, you know, lack of acknowledgement and obscurity, and then emerging. I put yeah, I laid out these bits of wood, which are 3,000 years old, which when I lived in Grava the first 10 years, I dug out of my peat banks. They were right down the bottom on the rock, and it was as though 3,000 years ago there was a birch and hazelwood there, and when all the rain came and the peat started forming and the bogs, the trees all fell in, and they're still sort of all preserved there. And I used to cut them out, and they were like almost like cutting bones, you know, all red inside, and then they dried out and formed all these lovely dry bits. And then I'm lighting the candles as I come out into a new hope, and yeah. New start of life, really. I think one important point for me that I want to make is that it's like art. I mean, everything I did was art. I call myself an artist. I didn't go to art school, and lots of people have said to me that you can't be an artist, and that you've studied the history of art, you've been through the whole art training, and your art grows out of other art. And I just don't agree with that. And I think that everything that I've done has been art. And I've had all those exhibitions of things after the journeys, and you know, I've had the frock with me, and I've laid out the zodiac discs on the land, and I've sent postcards to a friend, and I've exhibited everything. And so I just feel it's all art, and I'm an artist, I hope. So I think that's it. That's all I've got to say.
That was wonderful.
And thank you to Jane, and thank you to Ian, and thank you to Fiona, and
thank you to you.
So, thank you for here.
Well, you'll be around for a wee bit longer if people want to buy the book and get it signed.
Yeah.
You can buy the Gypsy Switch and other ritual journeys, and also the writership book with more poems and more leads to follow. But it's been wonderful to celebrate with you. Thanks again. Please don't wait another 47 years before you come again. It's been wonderful to have you.
Right,
Thank you. Thank you, Jill.
Thank you.